Welcome to another Directions Mag podcast, co-hosted with our friends at Urissa.
So my name is Tory Elmore. I'm a freelance GIS analyst currently doing work with Audubon, Alaska. And I'm also working towards a master's degree in GIS development at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And I'm here today with Asa Strong. So Asa, could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hey, thanks for having me. I'm Asa. I'm a product manager at Planet. Planet's a satellite company, and I work on building integrations into different GIS software systems and other geospatial engines. Excited to be here.
Because I know you have a lot of experience working with Planet, and then, going back to some of the other positions that you've held in this space of sort of like environmental protection, in that, you've done some of this monitoring work around how we use satellite imagery and GIS to sort of prevent environmental harm. So whether that's, related to deforestation or related to mining or oil extraction, we're really interested in hearing about, some of the ways that people either at Planet or folks at other organizations as well are sort of implementing GIS and satellite imagery.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, as I've been interested in GIS software for quite a while. Almost since middle of college, and what really got me interested in the satellite space specifically was um, starting work at an organization, the World Resources Institute in DC. They have a project there called Global Forest Watch. I was around in 2014 when the site first launched. And it was kind of this like first attempt to try to monitor deforestation at a globally consistent way using global satellite imagery data sets like Landsat. That's from the USGS, and then using kind of like this new fusion of remote sensing that's always been around, but what kind of made it different was that we finally had like the cloud compute scale to analyze something as big as the Landsat archive. I don't think anything had ever actually been done at that scale until something like Google Earth Engine came around that allowed the scientists that we partnered with to actually analyze deforestation at first on an annual basis, and then actually scaled it up to even more frequently. But that was just kind of like a wake up call for myself. I'm like, wow, we can really like monitor so many interesting things on the world, that's dynamic and changing all the time. It got me, curious and interested in like, what are the other use cases, which I think, kind of inevitably led me to Planet actually able to image the entire Earth every single day at a higher resolution than Landsat, so at like 3 to 5 meters. Yeah, still very focused on like how do we detect changes, for environmental purposes. We still do a lot of work with deforestation, actually, directly supporting things like Global Forest Watch through a big grant that we just signed with the Norwegian government to make forest-related imagery available for the tropics. So still working on, how do we do this monitoring? But I do think the fusion into GIS software is really important, and that's like where I kind of focus on as a product manager, because I think it's still very difficult to use imagery inside of GIS software, and I think there are ways to make that experience better and to actually help GIS analysts and cartographers leverage satellite imagery to better monitor the areas that they care about.
Yeah, I definitely feel that as someone who has worked with a fair amount of imagery, and just trying to incorporate imagery into like cartographic design can definitely be challenging. And even just like working with data sets like that in, whether it's in an ArcMap environment or in an open source environment, I could definitely see the challenges related to that. But you mentioned, I know you mentioned deforestation, and you mentioned, a couple other like use cases that you've had experience with. So could you tell us about that? What are some of the other use cases that that are currently, using satellite imagery to track these kind of activities.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'll list off, a couple use cases. And so one is, one of my favorite organizations to work with in the past year has been the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. They've been using Planet for a while, and they've been trying to use our imagery inside of a tool called Google Earth Engine. And they essentially what they do is they work very specifically with tropical forested countries. But the way that they work, I think it's important, especially when working, in some developing countries, is to like give those governmental agencies the agency to actually like run these geospatial analyses themselves. So UNFAO really focuses on capacity building, and they do it by building basically like an analytical hub that like has a bunch of tools and functions that these countries can tap into to do things like land cover classification. Right, and then like if you create two different land cover classifications from two different dates, you could do some interesting analysis of basically what changed into what, right? Which is important for monitoring deforestation at a large scale, so you can start to understand, we lost not just like we lost X amount of forest, but we lost X amount of forest to smallholder agriculture. We lost X amount of forest to industrial agriculture. We lost X amount of forest to mining. So that's a huge thing in the forestry community. Is just like how do we do land cover change maps? And so we were working with them, and I think it was going well. But I think what's really bolstered that work is we now have these what we call tropical base maps, which are an interesting imagery source where essentially planet images the entire world every day, but it comes in these like scenes that there could be thousands, for a regional area or a province. And what a base map does is basically for your time of interest in an area of interest. So in this case, the entire tropics. We can actually choose the best looking images for our users using some machine learning, and basically select the best available pixels for that time of interest. So for this particular use case and to support deforestation work, we wanted to use monthly base maps. So we actually pull out the best looking images for those months that cover the entire tropics, which is really helpful, especially in areas like the Amazon and Congo, because it's so cloudy there, right? So you could imagine that you can get like in some places in Congo, you can get 30 days of images and like only like 2 of them are clear. So these tropical base maps help create like an almost cloud-free look at the tropics. And then we can actually go a step further and process them so that they're actually surface reflectance corrected, which essentially means we're like doing the atmospheric correction for our users, so that the pixel values better represent biophysical qualities, which is important for doing analysis on vegetation and forest. So those are now in the hands of FAO, and we're working with them today on basically getting it into the applications that they use so that they can do near tropical analysis and support these countries a little bit better. So that's a great deforestation use case. I think the prompt that you were asking for is, identifying change in monitoring use cases. And another, examples, we do work with some civil society, civil government organizations. So counties, state land offices. So, a couple that come to mind are like Humboldt County has been using our imagery to basically image their entire county in high resolution every 6 weeks. And then they actually use that high resolution imagery to pinpoint illegal marijuana grow operations. And so in California, marijuana is actually legal in the state. So up in Humboldt County is actually like a place of a lot of illicit grow operations that can lead to crime, and the counties aren't actually able to like recoup their revenue they could otherwise make through legally taxed agriculture. And then New Mexico State Lands Office uses kind of like a really similar approach, but to monitor for like mining, illegal mining extraction. So there's so much opportunity for mining out there, that these companies for a long time have just been like mining and hoping that that the revenue that they'll extract through illegally mining in areas that they're not allowed to, will make up for any fine that they get from the government. So they'll actually just go out and start mining, and then they think the government will be so slow to respond that by the time that they do, the fine is going to be less than the actual money they'll make. So kind of encourages like a not a good land use practice. And so New Mexico State Lands now uses that satellite imagery to more quickly respond to those infractions.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Working in sort of the public land space, I know the way we used to kind of discover illegal marijuana grows out, often in the middle of public lands or in wilderness areas was, often stumbling upon them or, like irrigation lines. And so I think it kind of also provides a safer approach to that you're not, as a the people who are working on our public lands, our rangers, et cetera, are not necessarily just going to walk into the middle of a marijuana grow, but that they have this sort of safer and lab-based way to approach things like that. So that's really
Absolutely.
interesting.
Yeah, it's definitely a part of it. Talking to officers up there in Humboldt, things can get a little bit dicey when you're just kind of wandering around. There's no service in parts of the Humboldt County area, up near Lost Coast and stuff. So having some direction when you're out there is important.
Yeah, I was really interested in seeing the imagery that Planet had released after an oil spill in like northern Russia, and how you could see the oil on the ground. So I imagine that there are implications for sort of human caused disasters as well.
Yeah, absolutely. One example that happened recently was the explosion in Beirut. Um, we actually had an image, available from one of our satellites, minutes after the explosion, and the government in Beirut used it to identify the buildings that were actually destroyed. And we got, it's one of those things that makes you happy, where you work, and like we got some notes back from the government that they, really felt like they saved, hundreds of lives by basically knowing like where the damage was by being able to get that kind of really quick image to do a rapid response.
I know, I think you and I came across one of the limitations of satellite data when we were talking about imaging, high latitude areas like, northern Alaska or, you know, the South Pole area kind of comes to mind. I'm not sure really what illegal activities may be going on down there. So could you talk about that and maybe any other limitations that come to mind in terms of the satellite data?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Alaska, I feel like is a great example, just because it's so large, right? And it's hard, like you don't have as many people on the ground, like in a density type of way to actually like respond to different activities that are going on, whether it be illegal drilling or other environmental destruction that you might want to discourage. So I think imagery can play a good role in that, as well as understanding maybe like habitat change over time. But I think that there are definitely always strong limitations with using satellite imagery. One is that um, it's never a substitute for having strong action networks on the ground, whether those be civil society, and how they're able to like respond to different disasters or different um, environmental destruction, or just like having a government that's willing to stand up and respond in a timely way. Um, so imagery can only get you so far. But I do think it's important because it allows you to, I think one of the issues that we'd run into sometimes, organizations like Global Forest Watch was we were working with deforestation alerts, and it's just like a pink pixel, on a map. And it just tells you so much. It can tell you that there's something going on here, which is great, and it kind of draws your eye. But what imagery really does is it helps set that context, so you can pretty quickly, with the resolution of most planet imagery, pick out is this change occurring because of in the context of deforestation, is it occurring because of smallholder agriculture, which warrants, a totally different response than like something like an industrial plantation being developed. I think, probably similar things that are going on with like oil drilling in potentially non-sanctioned areas in Alaska. You can use, we have this pattern that we call tip and cue, which is essentially you can use our daily revisit imagery, which is a little bit coarser, it's 3 to 5 meters, to basically identify change. And so you might identify like, hey, there's like a new well pad here that's interesting, and this, isn't a place where a well pad should be. And then you can cue something like our high resolution satellites to actually task that area of interest. So you can say, get a more detailed image, and that might even be able to tell you, like, is there equipment on the well pad? Have they actually started drilling? Is it active? Or is this just a well pad that, had a bunch of dust on it and it's been uncovered? So I think there are ways to kind of combine those to get a little bit more detail. But I think the other limitation just kind of comes to, so one, you should have strong action networks that can actually do something with the imagery. And two, I think, what I work a lot on is just like imagery is still hard to access and use and analyze. And so, I've been using this example of deforestation alerts, but I think that's like, I use it because it's one of those rare exceptions where we have a really good data set that shows us when forests are lost. And I think we need that for a lot of other things to like be able to more easily move our eyes to locations of change. And I think, Planet is trying to do that a bit with being able to, for example, detect roads as they're being built, or buildings as they're being built, which could be important for things like, roads are usually an early indicator of development in areas, which could be a risk for deforestation depending on where you are, or a risk for mining and other extractive industries. So I think we need a little bit more indicators that way. That's one way to make satellite imagery a little bit more understandable and easy to work with. But then also just, easier ways to access the imagery in like cloud optimized ways. Like, I think the paradigm of downloading GeoTIFFs and opening it into ArcGIS or opening it into QGIS is, it can only get you so far. And so I think providers like Planet and other companies are looking into how do we serve images in a way that like users can play around with the analytical qualities of the data without actually having to download it, more through like streaming capabilities. So just trying to make like the experience a little bit easier for, GIS analysts who are equipped to like understand what images are, but like don't necessarily have, the API savvy and the cloud savviness to work with petabytes of imagery in order to support their workflows.
So you mentioned sort of some other companies, and I just, just to do sort of my due diligence here, we've talked a lot about Planet, and I'm just wondering if there are other companies that are sort of in this same, like a same or similar space. Obviously I think of Google Maps, but I'm actually not really familiar with how often that imagery is updated. So could you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Google is interesting because so Planet actually acquired a satellite constellation from Google called Skybox. It's now called SkySat. Um, Google definitely plays like a really good role in a couple of ways. I think, Google Maps is updated at a commercial imagery level, and that commercial imagery is usually um, less frequent because we've gotten used to really high resolution data. And so Planet doesn't, Planet's resolution, the maximum, or most high resolution is about 50 centimeters, which is like the one on the more coarse level of what you'll see in a consumer-facing mapping application like Google Maps. So they typically will acquire imagery from places like Digital Globe, Airbus, other satellites that are able to actually get very high-resolution pictures, but at less frequency. And so, I like working with the Google team. I work with them mostly on their Earth Engine application, which is a really powerful geo engine that essentially has a number of open data sets sitting on top of Google servers that are basically ready to be tapped into analytically. They have the entire Landsat archive on there. They have Sentinel, and we are building, integrations to make it easier to port planet imagery into the Earth Engine space. So I do think they provide really good software for understanding satellite images. Esri is another organization that provides really good mapping software, and I think they're working more on how does imagery become a complement to mapping capabilities. So we work with their team on building easier ways to access imagery within ArcGIS. And then, yeah, there are definitely other satellite companies. A little bit less familiar with like the tools that they build as much as I am with their imagery, but there's, Airbus and Digital Globe. And, there's a couple of others that I think are coming into the space, like Black Sky.
So you kind of just reminded me of something else. I know you've talked about Google Earth Engine a lot. You haven't really mentioned at all any of the like programs that I sort of associate with my like remote sensing courses in college, like ERDAS or any of those sort of traditional remote sensing programs. So I'm just wondering, like, what is the role that they play, if any?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I think a lot of my work in the past year is focused on QGIS, ArcGIS, and Earth Engine, so it's top of mind. I've been talking a little bit more with the NV teams and the ERDAS teams on, how do we build better integrations into their software. NV was the first remote sensing program I ever used. It's very good as well. It's very scientific. I think it's a little bit more legacy in terms of it being like a standard desktop application that runs on images that are on your desktop as well. But I know that team is building more into open standards that come with cloud technologies. I know that they're looking at things like OGC standards and looking at specs like COGS, which are cloud optimized geotips. And so I think, where we're interested in working specifically with them is around like how do we make it easier for users to access imagery in a way that they can kind of scale their analyses a little bit more. But I still think those systems are great, and they have like a ton of different scientific tooling. And so I think, I haven't played around with them as much recently, but I still think that they're a good way to understand like the basics of remote sensing. Understand like what does it mean when you run in DVI? Like what is that actually doing on an image? And I think those tools are always going to be effective for that.
Let's say I'm either a college student or maybe I'm a graduate student, or even I'm someone working in geospatial technology, and this is a space I want to get into. What are kind of the prerequisite skills, or what should I be doing now, or what should people be doing now if they're interested in working in a similar space, like working in a position like the one you're in?
Yeah, I mean, first, I think it's a great time to get into the industry. I think there's never been a cooler time to be a geographer. We have just like really awesome data sets and really awesome technology at our fingertips, and I think it's still coming to fruition. So it's an exciting time. Like I think the geo industry has lagged behind some of the other tools that we've seen be revolutionized by the internet, and so I think we're making it easier every day, and I think it's fun to be a part of that transition. And so I think it depends on what you want to do. I mean, I think we need people from all sorts of backgrounds to help us make that transition easier. I'm a product manager. There are product managers who have lots of geo experience. There are product managers who don't. I think, being a good product manager means that you know how to listen to your users, understand what their needs are, and kind of reconcile that with the business objectives, while also, having some technical savvy to work with your engineering teams. But, I think if you're more interested in the analysis engineering space, I definitely, think the Python community is really great for geo. There's lots of open tools out there, and then the Stack Flow messages are very, very busy with the community support on learning Python for geospatial. There's lots of open source tools. We're lucky enough to have, some famous Python gurus like Frank Coote, who invented GDAL, working at Planet, and Tim Schwab, who worked on the GeoJSON spec. So I think programming, if you're interested in becoming more of an analyst, will help you with just like your prospects instead of getting locked into a single tool or system. I think you'll always have a little bit more options if you jump into more of like the actual underlying technology. I still think, having some familiarity with Esri, an 800-pound gorilla in the geospace is important. I'd also say Earth Engine is just like a really fun platform to play around with if you are trying to understand imagery science a little bit more. It's so easy to prototype. It's free for now, and it's just like a great way to try to do something really cool with an image in a cloud optimized way. So yeah, I think it depends. Like if you're trying to go on a technical route, I think a mix of programming and software skills is great. I think if you're interested in driving products, or maybe even working in the sales force of like one of these organizations that builds geo products, I think there are different ways to cultivate those skills.
That sort of covers the questions that I had for you. I know I've learned a lot. So before we, today, I just wondered if there's anything else. There doesn't have to be, but if there's anything else that you want to mention that we haven't had a chance to talk about, or shamelessly plug something of your own, something that you're doing right now.
Yeah, I know. No, this has been great, and it's good to reconnect. Thank you for having me on. I always want to nerd out about geo stuff. No, I mean, less of a shameless plug, more of like an invitation. But we do, we've done a unique opportunity in the last couple months through the Norwegian government, where we have these tropical base maps that users can access for deforestation related work. So if there are any listeners that are working in monitoring, things like deforestation, would like to get started with satellite imagery in those workflows, let me see, I think it might be planet.com-NICFI, and I see it's unprecedented. Like we've never actually, had this amount of data available at this scale for supporting deforestation work. There are some terms there, but yeah, it's kind of a cool opportunity.
Yeah. So it's good to talk to you.
Thanks for having me on, y'all.